I'll never forget the sound of laughter as I packed up my desk. It was a Friday morning, 9:42 a.m., and I was standing in the middle of Northbridge Consulting's open office, surrounded by people I'd worked with for 8 years. My boss, Clarissa Doyle, had just fired me in front of everyone. Her voice was loud, cruel, and deliberate. "Lizzie here has been let go effective immediately due to negligence on the Baxter account," she announced, like she was reading the weather report. And then, as if to twist the knife, a few of my coworkers, people I'd considered friends, laughed. Not loud, not openly, but enough to make my skin crawl. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just grabbed my mug, my half-dead office plant, and walked out, my dignity packed in a cardboard box. But as I stood on the curb, waiting for a taxi, something inside me shifted. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning. My name is Lizzie Anders. I'm 33 years old, and for 8 years, I was the Senior Operations Coordinator at Northbridge Consulting. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was mine. I knew every inch of that office. The way the light hit the glass walls in the morning, the hum of the printer that always jammed on Wednesdays, the smell of burnt coffee in the break room. I wasn't the loudest voice in the room, and no one ever called me brilliant. That word was reserved for people like Clarissa. Clarissa Doyle was everything I wasn't. Charismatic, sharp, and impossible to challenge. She'd been promoted just 2 years into her time at the firm, and she walked through the office like she owned it, even before she officially did. Most people adored her. I respected her, at least at first. She was the kind of leader who made you feel like you were part of something bigger, something important. But over time, I started to see the cracks. The way she'd smile while delivering bad news, the way she'd take credit for other people's work, the way she'd dismiss anyone who questioned her. I'd wake up every morning at 6:30, brew a pot of coffee, black, no sugar, and get to the office by 8. I'd spend my days juggling schedules, reviewing reports, keeping the gears of Northbridge turning. My desk was a mess of sticky notes and highlighters, but I liked it that way. It was organized chaos, my chaos. I'd built relationships there, too. There was Sarah from accounting, who always brought me a cookie from her weekend baking experiments, Tom in IT, who'd grumble about the VPN but fix it every time I asked, and Brian from compliance, who'd stop by to chat about baseball stats over lukewarm coffee. 8 years of small moments, quiet loyalties, a life I'd carved out for myself. Then there was Ava, the intern. She was 22, fresh out of university, and eager to prove herself. I'd been mentoring her for 3 months, teaching her everything from procurement workflows to client protocols. She was smart, yes, but still green. I'd sit with her at lunch sometimes, going over spreadsheets, explaining how to spot errors in vendor logs, showing her the ropes the way no one had for me when I started. She'd nod, take notes, ask questions. I thought she looked up to me. I thought wrong. It all started with the Baxter account, one of our largest corporate clients. I'd been working on it for weeks, late nights, early mornings, triple-checking every detail. That Friday, I was reviewing the final logistics report at my desk, the cursor blinking on my screen, when Clarissa walked in. Her heels clicked across the polished floor, a sound I'd come to recognize like a warning bell. Ava trailed behind her, eyes down, hands clasped tight. Clarissa stopped at my desk, arms folded, her face unreadable. "Boardroom, now." Her tone was sharp, the kind she usually reserved for suppliers or subcontractors. I stood, confused, my heart already ticking faster in my chest. The boardroom smelled like lemon cleaner and stale air. Ava lingered awkwardly near the wall while Clarissa slammed a printed email on the table in front of me. "You sent this file to Baxter without removing the internal projections tab," she said, her voice like ice. I blinked. The document was familiar. Something I'd reviewed last Tuesday, but I hadn't finalized it. "I didn't send the file," I said quietly. I passed it to Ava for final formatting, like we agreed. Clarissa's eyes narrowed. "Ava said you told her it was ready." Ava shifted beside her, not meeting my eyes. "I told her to double-check it before sending," I replied carefully. "It was a draft." Clarissa turned to the window, hands on her hips. "Do you realize what this has cost us?" she said coldly. "Baxter's board is threatening to pull the entire account." My stomach dropped. That account represented nearly 40% of our annual revenue. I opened my mouth to speak, to defend myself further, but Clarissa whirled around and pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me. "You stupid girl," she snapped. "You were never the smart one here. You were just convenient." The words hung in the air like smoke. I felt them sink into me, sharp and heavy, cutting deeper than I'd ever admit. And then she did something worse than yelling. She walked back into the open office, gestured for everyone's attention, and said, "Just so everyone's aware, Lizzie here has been let go effective immediately due to negligence on the Baxter account." Silence. Then a few uncomfortable coughs. And then, God help them, a couple of people laughed. Sarah from accounting didn't laugh, but she didn't look at me either. Tom from IT coughed into his sleeve. Brian stared at his desk, jaw tight. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply gathered my things, my mug with the chipped handle, my sad little office plant with its drooping leaves, placed them in a spare box from under the printer, and walked out. My coat was still warm from the morning sun when I stepped outside, but I felt nothing. Not the breeze brushing my hair, not the burn rising in my throat, not the curious glances of people passing by as I stood on the curb with my box waiting for a taxi. I didn't call anyone, not my mom, not my best friend, not even Brian, who I knew would have listened. I just went home. That night, I didn't sleep. My apartment was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears until you can hear your own heartbeat. I sat on my couch, still in my work clothes, staring at the city lights blinking beyond my window. The warmth of the day had faded from the walls, leaving the room cold and unfamiliar. My mind replayed Clarissa's voice on a loop. "You were never the smart one. Just convenient, 8 years of loyalty erased in seconds. A reputation I'd quietly built, dependable, organized, the one who kept things running, shattered in front of everyone I thought respected me." I kept seeing Ava's face, her downcast eyes, her silence. I'd spent months teaching her, trusting her, and she'd let me take the fall. But as I stared at the ceiling in the early morning light, one thing became crystal clear. This wasn't just a cruel outburst. It was calculated. Clarissa hadn't fired me in a private meeting. She hadn't offered HR a chance to mediate. She hadn't even spoken to me like a human being. No, she'd staged it. A performance designed to humiliate me, to strip me of any credibility before I could ask questions. And worse, Ava, the intern I'd trained, had stood there and said nothing. I couldn't let it go. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because something about it didn't add up. So, that evening, I made a single phone call. The voice on the other end answered with practiced professionalism. "Chambers and Lowe, this is Diane." I cleared my throat. My voice was calm, too calm, maybe. "Hi, I need to speak to someone about wrongful termination and potentially corporate fraud." The next morning, I sat across from a woman named Eleanor Nash, a partner at Chambers and Lowe. She was in her late 40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense energy, the kind of woman who didn't waste words and didn't miss details. Her office was small but meticulous, a polished desk, a single potted plant thriving in the corner, a stack of legal pads lined up like soldiers. She scanned the brief intake form I'd filled out and raised an eyebrow. "You've never had disciplinary action, stellar reviews, and this was your first mistake?" I shook my head. It wasn't my mistake. Then why would they say it was? I hesitated, then spoke carefully. Because someone needed to be blamed. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "Tell me everything. Start from the top." It took over an hour, but I told her everything. The Baxter account, the intern, the final version of the file that I had specifically flagged as a draft, Clarissa's outburst, the public termination. My voice stayed steady, but my hands fidgeted in my lap, twisting the hem of my sweater. Then I told her something I hadn't admitted out loud until that moment. Last month, I caught a discrepancy in the vendor payment log. There were 2 invoices for the same work, same vendor ID, slightly different numbers. When I brought it up to Clarissa, she brushed it off, said the vendor must have made a mistake. And did they? I met her eyes. No. I called the vendor directly. They only sent 1 invoice. Eleanor's fingers paused over her keyboard. "You're saying someone created a duplicate payment request?" I nodded slowly. And 2 weeks later, I lost access to the payment dashboard. Clarissa said they were restructuring access levels, but nobody else on the team had their permissions changed. She didn't reply right away. Instead, she reached for a yellow legal pad and wrote a single word in all caps: retaliation. "Do you have access to any documents?" she asked. I hesitated. Maybe. "I have backups, old drafts, email chains, nothing official but enough to reconstruct the timeline." "That's a start," she said. "And Lizzie, don't delete or alter anything. From this moment on, every move you make matters." I exhaled slowly. The weight in my chest didn't vanish, but it shifted. Eleanor wasn't just humoring me. She believed me. And more than that, she saw something actionable in what I was saying. I left her office feeling unsteady but determined, like I'd just stepped onto a tightrope without knowing how far it stretched. That afternoon, I returned to my apartment and dug through my personal drive. I had a habit of saving work to my own cloud folders, not out of paranoia, but because I often worked late at home and hated the company VPN. My desk at home was a cluttered mess, an old laptop glowing in the dim light, a half-empty coffee mug from the morning, a notebook with scribbled to-do lists. I scrolled back through my project archives until I found the Baxter file. There it was, a draft time-stamped 2 days before the incident, clearly marked preliminary in the file name. Attached to it was an email I'd sent to Ava. "Hi, Ava. Please double-check all tabs and remove internal sheets before sending to Baxter. This is a working draft. L." I stared at the screen for a long moment, my hands trembling. The truth was right there, buried in the quiet places no one had thought to look. I could still hear Clarissa's voice. "You stupid girl." But now it sounded hollow, like a mask slipping off. I started pulling other files, too. Emails about the vendor logs, notes I'd made about the duplicate invoices, timestamps showing when my access was cut. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to paint a picture. Then, just as I was about to start organizing the files for Eleanor, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring once, twice, then picked up. "Hello?" A familiar voice came through, low and hesitant. "Lizzie, it's Ava." My stomach turned. She continued, barely above a whisper. "I didn't know she was going to do that to you. She told me you'd signed off on the file." I was scared. "I'm sorry." I cut her off. "Ava, why are you calling me?" Silence. Then, "Because I think she's about to do the same thing to someone else. And there's something you should see." Ava's voice was shaking, but behind the fear I could hear something else. Guilt. "I'm sorry, Lizzie. I swear I didn't know Clarissa was going to throw you under the bus like that." She made it sound like it was no big deal. "No big deal?" I repeated slowly. "She fired me in front of the entire office, Ava." "I know. I didn't think she'd actually—" Ava stopped, swallowed, and sighed. "Can I come over? I have something to show you." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to hang up, to let the betrayal fester, but the rest of me, the part that had spent the last 48 hours piecing together breadcrumbs, knew better. "Come," I said. "But bring everything." She showed up 30 minutes later in jeans and a hoodie, her normally bright face clouded by something heavier than shame. She looked like she hadn't slept either. We sat at my dining table, a scratched-up wooden thing I'd bought secondhand years ago. I poured her some tea, chamomile, because it's what I had, but she didn't touch it. Instead, she opened her laptop and turned the screen toward me. "I took a screenshot the day after you were fired. Something about the whole thing didn't sit right." On her screen was an internal memo I hadn't seen. It was a list of departmental restructuring notes dated 2 weeks before the Baxter incident. Right beside my name, there was a single sentence in red text. "Pending replacement. Prepare onboarding for Ava." My breath caught. "You were going to replace me," I said flatly. Ava nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Clarissa told me I'd be promoted if I took on more responsibility, that it was part of her leadership development initiative." "I didn't know she meant—" "She planned this," I said, cutting her off. She had it in motion before the Baxter email was even sent. "I think she's done this before," Ava said quietly. "With someone else. Before I joined. A guy in procurement. Henry something. People said he just vanished one day." Henry. I remembered him. Detail-oriented, soft-spoken, always wore a gray sweater that smelled faintly of mothballs. We'd worked on a supply chain project together 2 years ago. He'd suddenly stopped showing up one Monday. Management claimed he'd taken a leave of absence, but he never came back. I opened my laptop and started digging. Henry Walters. I searched his name through old project files, email chains, even Slack archives. There he was. Messages about delivery schedules, a polite note about a missing invoice, and then, like a ghost, gone. His access revoked, email disabled. No goodbye, no formal announcement, just like me. Clarissa's MO is simple, I said aloud, thinking more than speaking. She identifies someone who knows too much, isolates them, discredits them, and replaces them with someone easier to control. She's also falsifying vendor payments, Ava added quietly. I froze. What? I overheard her on the phone 3 days before you were let go. She was arguing with someone about how the numbers don't match and said something like, just duplicate the last payment file and call it reconciliation. I didn't understand what she meant at the time, but I did, and Eleanor would too. I grabbed a flash drive from my drawer, a cheap blue one I'd gotten free at a conference, and began transferring files, emails, spreadsheets, Ava's screenshot, the draft Baxter file, everything I had. My hands moved fast, but my mind was faster, connecting dots I hadn't seen before. Why are you helping me now? I asked her finally. Ava looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting together. Because you were the only one who treated me like a person. You taught me everything. You never talked down to me, and I let her use me to destroy you. The sincerity in her voice hit something inside me. It didn't erase what happened, but it softened the edges. And, she added, Clarissa is going after Brian next. Brian from compliance. Ava nodded. He raised questions last week about some discrepancies in our audit logs. She's been meeting with HR behind closed doors ever since. A chill ran through me. This wasn't just personal revenge anymore. This was a pattern, a system. I emailed everything to Eleanor with the subject line. This goes deeper than we thought. Then I called her directly. She picked up on the first ring. I have evidence, I said without preamble. Real evidence. And a witness. Her tone sharpened immediately. I'm listening. As I walked her through the files, the pattern, Ava's story, and the connection to Henry and Brian, her silence was telling. When I finished, she said, We're not dealing with a simple wrongful termination anymore. If what you're saying holds, this is a coordinated abuse of power, possibly embezzlement, possibly witness intimidation, and corporate fraud. Then what's the next move? I asked. There was a pause. You don't make the next move, Lizzie. I do. Monday morning arrived like thunder, loud in my chest, quiet on the outside. I sat by the window with a cup of black coffee, steam curling up in the gray light, staring at the clouds that hung over the city like a secret waiting to break. The documents had been sent, the emails forwarded, the puzzle pieces placed on the table. Now it was Eleanor's move. I didn't pace, I didn't fidget. I just sat there, letting the coffee grow cold in my hands, waiting for something to shift. At precisely 9 a.m., my phone rang. Lizzie, Eleanor said without preamble. I just got off the phone with Northbridge's internal counsel. My heart skipped. They're rattled. I sent over a formal notice this morning. We're filing a wrongful termination suit citing retaliation, defamation, and constructive dismissal. I've also included the memo Ava provided, and we're requesting an injunction to prevent the deletion of any internal communications over the last 90 days. I let out a slow breath. And how did they respond? They panicked. First denied everything, then asked if we'd be willing to discuss terms privately. I laughed, dry and humorless. Of course they did. And Clarissa, they claimed she was acting on information provided by HR. Convenient. But they've already put out feelers. I suspect they're planning to distance themselves from her fast. I didn't reply. Not yet. I let the weight of it sink in. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the culture she'd cultivated, the people she'd stepped on and silenced. The ones like Henry, like Brian, like me. I have a contact at the Department of Labor, Eleanor added. They handle whistleblower protections. I want you to speak to them today. Off the record for now, but if we go public, you'll need to be protected. Protected? I asked, raising an eyebrow even though she couldn't see it. You're a threat now, Lizzie. Clarissa knows it. So does the firm. I hung up, feeling strange, empowered but uneasy. The apartment felt smaller somehow, the walls closer, the air thicker. I spent the afternoon on the phone with Eleanor's contact, a woman named Carla who spoke in clipped, efficient sentences. She asked about timelines, evidence, witnesses. I answered every question, my voice steady but my mind racing. When I hung up, I stood at my window again, watching the city move below me, cars inching through traffic, people hurrying under umbrellas. Life went on out there, but in here, everything had changed. Later that afternoon, I received a knock at the door. Ava again, her face pale, her hoodie zipped up to her chin. She knows, she said the moment I opened the door. Clarissa. She called me into her office this morning, said there was an ongoing legal matter and I was to speak to no one. Not you, not HR, no one. And then she offered me a full-time position starting next week. My jaw tightened. She's buying your silence. Ava nodded, looking sick. But it's too late for that, I said. The ball's already rolling. Ava hesitated, then pulled out her phone and handed it to me. She left the room during our meeting and She looked away. I hit record. I don't know if it'll help, but I played the audio. Clarissa's voice came through, sharp and smug. We can't have people digging into every little mistake. What matters now is who's loyal. I've protected this firm's reputation for years. If that means cutting a few loose ends, so be it. My blood ran cold. That wasn't just arrogance. That was intent, premeditated, and on tape. Ava, I said slowly, you just gave us the nail in her coffin. By evening, Eleanor had the audio clip. We'll use this strategically, she said. Not yet, but soon. I could hear the edge in her voice, the kind that comes when you know you've got something big. I didn't sleep much that night either. I kept thinking about Clarissa, her polished suits, her confident stride, the way she'd looked at me like I was nothing. She thought she'd won that day in the boardroom. She had no idea what was coming. That night, I received an unexpected email from Brian. Subject, I think I'm next. He'd been placed on administrative review for compliance inconsistencies. He'd worked at Northbridge for over 10 years, never had a single write-up. It was starting again. Same pattern, different target. I forwarded the message to Eleanor, then stared at the screen long after the confirmation popped up. Clarissa had built an entire kingdom on fear, control, and manipulation. She rose by stepping on the backs of those too quiet, too loyal, too trusting to fight back. But now, the quiet ones had receipts, and we were done being convenient. 3 days later, Northbridge Consulting froze in place. It started quietly, just a whisper that something was happening. Then, before the end of the week, it was official. An independent legal investigation had been launched. Every department head was notified. Clarissa, usually the first to hold court in morning briefings, was nowhere to be seen. I didn't have to be in the building to feel the tremor ripple through its walls. I pictured the glass office, the hum of the printer, the nervous glances exchanged over cubicles. The place I'd known so well was shifting under the weight of its own secrets. The internal announcement was polished and vague. To ensure full transparency, the executive team has engaged an external legal firm to review recent employee concerns regarding management conduct and operational processes. We are committed to maintaining the highest ethical standards, but the staff knew. They always do. Behind closed doors, hushed conversations passed from desk to desk. Some whispered that the board was preparing to make changes. Others speculated about Clarissa's absence. One brave junior analyst posted a cryptic message on the company's private Slack thread. Guess the intern wasn't the only one watching. I smiled when Eleanor read that one to me over the phone. The tide was turning, and I watched it all from the quiet safety of my apartment. Every update came through Eleanor. She's being questioned, she told me late Thursday afternoon. They've already discovered discrepancies in the vendor ledger, payments processed without formal authorization, duplicate invoices, and 3 different reports that appear to have been altered post-submission. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. It's finally happening. It is, Eleanor agreed. But you need to be ready for what happens when they realize just how central you are to all of this. The next morning, I received an official email from Northbridge's legal department requesting an in-person meeting. "Representation is welcome," it read. That was all I needed to hear. Eleanor and I arrived together at the firm's downtown headquarters. It was surreal being back. The lobby smelled the same, polished wood and faint perfume. The security guard at the front desk didn't meet my eye. A few familiar faces glanced my way, then quickly looked down. No more laughter this time. We rode the elevator in silence, the hum of it vibrating through me, a reminder of all the mornings I'd spent here, coffee in hand, ready to face the day. We were escorted to a glass conference room overlooking the city. Inside sat two senior partners from the legal firm conducting the investigation, a representative from HR, and a board member I barely recognized, a man with gray hair and a tired expression. Clarissa wasn't there. "Miss Anders," one of the investigators began, his voice smooth but cautious. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. We're hoping you can clarify a few matters surrounding your recent termination and related internal concerns." Eleanor spoke before I could respond. "My client is prepared to provide full transparency, but I want to be clear. This meeting is not a favor, it is a courtesy. You will treat her with the respect and seriousness she was denied during her employment." The investigator nodded quickly. "Understood." I took a breath and laid out everything. The Baxter account, the manipulated files, the memo Ava discovered, the pattern of disappearances, Henry, Brian, my access being revoked, the vendor invoice irregularities, the conversations I'd documented, and finally, Ava's audio recording. When I pressed play on my phone, Clarissa's voice filled the room. "We can't have people digging into every little mistake. If that means cutting a few loose ends, so be it." No one spoke when the clip ended. The board member pressed his lips into a thin line. The HR rep looked down and scribbled something nervously. "We'll need to authenticate the source," the investigator said, though his voice was noticeably tighter. "Do that," Eleanor replied. "In the meantime, my client will be filing a formal whistleblower disclosure. You can either cooperate or fight, but I suggest you start listening because this time Lizzie will be heard." I didn't say much after that. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself, and Eleanor's presence was a wall they couldn't climb. When we left the building, the air felt different, lighter, sharper. The city buzzed around me, horns honking, people rushing by, but I felt still, grounded. Outside, Ava was waiting on the steps, her hands shoved in her pockets. "They pulled me into a meeting this morning," she said breathlessly. I told them everything. The fake training program, the false promises, the pressure to backdate documents. "I'm done covering for her." I nodded. "You did the right thing." "No," Ava said. "You did. I just finally followed your lead." Later that night, I received a message from Brian. "Clarissa suspended. The investigation is expanding. They're reopening past terminations. They're calling it a culture audit. Whatever you started, it's working." I sat on my couch, reading the words over and over, letting them settle into me. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to exhale fully. Not because it was over, but because the lie was unraveling, and the truth was finally louder than her voice. It was a quiet Wednesday morning when I received the email that changed everything. Subject: Resolution and Reinstatement Proposal. I stared at it for a long time before opening it, the cursor hovering over the screen like it knew what was coming. The message was brief: a formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing, a full retraction of my termination, reinstatement of my role with back pay, continuation of my benefits, pension, and seniority, and a final paragraph that felt like more than just words. "We recognize that Ms. Anders acted with integrity, professionalism, and concern for the well-being of this organization. We deeply regret the treatment she received, and we thank her for bringing critical issues to our attention." It was signed by the board, not Clarissa, because Clarissa was no longer with Northbridge Consulting. The investigation had revealed more than expected: falsified documents, retaliatory terminations, and a string of quietly covered-up ethics violations that stretched back nearly 5 years. HR was implicated in enabling her decisions. So was one of the board members, the gray-haired man I'd barely recognized. By the time the final report was complete, Clarissa had been formally terminated for cause with no severance. Two HR managers were also dismissed, and Northbridge had begun a complete internal overhaul of its compliance structure, including a new ethics and accountability task force. They invited me to lead it. I declined. I didn't want to spend the rest of my career cleaning up someone else's mess. I wanted to do something that felt like building, not fixing. So instead, I accepted a separate offer from a nonprofit that supports whistleblowers and workplace fairness initiatives across the country. I became a speaker, a mentor, a guide for people who felt silenced, scared, and small. People like I once was. My new office was nothing like Northbridge. No glass walls, no polished floors, just a small room with a desk, a chair, and a window that let in soft light. But it was mine, and it felt right. I kept Eleanor on speed dial, and I kept Ava in my life, too. She'd officially resigned from Northbridge and taken a new job with a firm that valued transparency. We met for coffee a few weeks after everything settled, at a little place near my apartment with mismatched chairs and strong espresso. She looked lighter, her shoulders less hunched, her eyes brighter. "I can't stop thinking about the day you were fired," she said, stirring her latte. The silence in the office, no one said a word, including me. I nodded. "You were scared, so was I. But you stood up when it hurt. That's the difference." She smiled at that. "You taught me that strength doesn't always look loud." We talked about the others who had come forward. Brian, who now led compliance training and texted me updates about his latest projects. A former finance assistant who uncovered more falsified ledgers and sent me a quiet thank you email. Even Henry Walters, who reached out from across the country after hearing what happened. "Guess I wasn't crazy," he wrote. She made me think I was. I wrote back, "You were never crazy. You were just early." Northbridge issued a public statement 6 months after the investigation concluded. They acknowledged a pattern of retaliatory leadership, praised those who had come forward, and pledged ongoing reform. I read it without emotion, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't need their apology to know what I'd done was right. Sometimes justice doesn't come with applause. It comes with quiet reforms, with silent acknowledgments, with policies rewritten because someone refused to stay silent. And that was enough. 1 year later, I received an invitation in the mail. It was from Northbridge's new CEO, a woman named Miriam, who'd been brought in to clean house. She was launching a new leadership program focused on ethical management. The keynote speaker slot, she offered it to me. I thought long and hard about accepting. At first, I almost said no. I didn't want to step back into that world, to face those glass walls again. But then I remembered something Eleanor said during our last meeting. "You didn't just expose the problem, Lizzie. You rewrote the playbook." So, I walked into that conference hall in a navy blue suit, the same kind of suit Clarissa used to wear like armor. But on me, it didn't feel like armor. It felt like clarity. My heels clicked across the floor, a steady rhythm that grounded me. When I stepped up to the podium, the room fell silent. I looked out over the crowd of bright eyes and anxious postures. People trying to climb the ladder, people trying to stay afloat, people just trying to do the right thing. And I said this. I was once called a stupid girl. I was told I was never the smart one. I was fired in front of my coworkers and laughed at while I packed my things. But here's the thing about being underestimated. When they don't see you coming, they don't see the strength you've been building, quietly, carefully, brick by brick. If you are in a room where speaking the truth costs you everything, then you are not in a room that deserves you, and you don't have to burn everything down to rise. Sometimes you just have to leave the door open, so the next person behind you knows which way is out. The room erupted into applause, but I didn't smile for them. I smiled for myself, because finally my voice was the loudest thing in the room. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt underestimated or silenced, I want you to know that your voice matters. Stand up, speak out, and don't let anyone make you feel small. Hit that like button if you believe in the power of truth. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more stories of resilience and justice. And don't forget to leave a comment below. Tell me your story. Let's keep the conversation going. Because together, we can make sure no one else has to walk out with their dignity in a box.